Hello, everyone. I'm Shwetangana Chakrabarti, the editor of the International Educator. A big warm welcome to the Thai podcast series. The Thai podcasts aim to bring alive the latest research in education, leadership strategies, DEIJ initiatives, classroom stories, and student initiatives. Thai will be inviting the thought leaders, the school leaders, the student leaders in international education to share their stories with our audience. In the next 20 to 30 minutes, we will take you through a journey of excellence in education. This is our way of building capacity within our community by inspiring, equipping, and empowering you with the finest examples of practice in education. Keep listening and keep sharing.
So, warm welcome to everybody. This podcast is being brought to you jointly by the International Educator and the Principals Training Center. Both the PTC and Thai are arms of the same nonprofit organization, and I'm Bambi Betts, the CEO of our overarching organization. Since the beginning, over 3 decades ago, our mission has always been the same, and it's to provide services and tools to advance learning and leading and teaching in international schools. And as many of you will know, PTC provides professional learning opportunities for educators and for leaders, and Thai provides recruitment and career development tools, as well as curates and creates content relevant to international schools. So as a service organization, we, like probably you in your schools, feel that we have a moral obligation, a moral responsibility to continually explore and create new ways to assist international schools to remain have that laser focus on their purpose of more and better learning for all kids, the ones that are in their charge. So in fact, this whole series that you're going to be engaging with is dedicated to exploring one such major tool, and this is the use of the standards of practice for international educators as one way to advance quality teaching, to uplift the profession. This is really important to us, is that we want to uplift the profession. We often have issues with whether we are a full-fledged profession, and one of the ways that we can do that is through the establishment and promotion and reaching towards standards, and of course their application to achieve more equity of access by all kids to quality teaching. So that's kind of the big overarching idea. So over the past several years, Thai and the PTC have collaborated with researchers and practitioners who are really focused on this idea of quality teaching being the major ingredient, the difference to learning and teaching. And together we've established these international standards of practice. Apart from that, many schools around the world have realized the power of standards in general to impact learning. And today we're going to have a conversation about that with some representatives of a particular international school. To guide us to the diving in piece here, we've invited Sue Easton, who is our Director of Programs at the PTC, to get us started. So Sue, over to you.
Welcome to the podcast. I am Sue Easton, the Director of Programs for the Principal Training Center, Teacher Leader Institute, and the Counselor Training Center. This podcast is a collaboration between the Principals Training Center and the International Educator. Using the teacher standards that have been made as a collaboration between the Principals Training Center, working with James Strong, Kevin Simpson of ALOC, and AISH, Thai has created a resume builder for international educators to collect evidence of their growth and development using these standards. But the question that we get constantly is, what should the evidence look like? But today, we want to make sure that we have a grounding in what teacher standards are and are not, and why, as a profession, we need them. I am so happy to be joined today by an esteemed panel of educators and leaders. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, share their current role, and briefly tell us why they think that international schools need a set, preferably common, of teacher standards. and why they think that there is a sense of urgency right now globally. We're going to start off with James Strong. Welcome.
And hello, everyone. Thank you, Sue. It's a pleasure to be with you. The first question that I'd like to attempt to answer is, so why standards? Why are we having this discussion? Why does it matter? And if you think of standards, standards represent a level of quality or attainment or both. In essence, they become a guiding light for us. They give us a sense of direction of what we should do. And if our goal is to indeed have quality in our schools, we need that guiding light. We need to know where we are and where we're going. Standards anchor us to know that what that ultimate goal is. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? How do you know that you have achieved something worthy? And that's where standards come to bear. I don't think they solve all of our problems, but I do think they give us a very good, clear sense of direction. Now, so let me add just one more comment about why standards in international schools. And my answer to that question is, one of the great benefits that international schools have is that they can be novel. They can change. Many of them, in fact, most are independently governed. Some for-profit, many not for-profit, and they can be quite nimble, and they can change if they choose to. But it also means that's one of their greatest liabilities. There's no obligation to change. There's no obligation necessarily to have an agreement on what quality performance among teachers is. And with that amount of fluidity and flexibility, we end up encountering in the international school arena just an array of what good teaching looks like. How do we know good teaching? How do we know the results of good teaching? Again, standards will anchor us across the 20,000 schools or so, international schools that we have or that we're anticipating by the year 2030. So I think they're essential. They give us the framework in which we can operate with everything that we do. So let me pause there.
Thanks so much, James. Having heard you speak internationally around the world, we are so pleased to have you join us today. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Great. I'd also like to introduce Brittany Betts.
Hi, Sue. I'm Brittany Betts from the International Educator. And thank you so much for including us in this amazing podcast. It's great to see so many people that we've collaborated with during this process on this call today. I think the question that how I want to step into this is, why is TIE a part of this conversation at all? You know, we help provide recruiting tools for schools and tools for candidates to find jobs. So we really stepped into this space about answering these questions about standards and how they should be using them as a company that felt that we had a role in how they could be implemented in the international school world. You know, when I had this initial conversation with James, with the PTC, with Aish, I think now about a decade ago, this exact conversation we're having was kind of a conversation that we were having too. We wanted to redo our website, redo our products, but instead of just kind of revamping them, we wanted to somehow contribute to elevating the profession. How do we step into this space and not only provide service, but really help to solve some of the problems that we were seeing in the recruiting space, some of those bottlenecks, both for clearing the pipeline, helping people move from one position to another, helping to increase the number of people in international schools. And we really thought that maybe the standards piece that was being used was kind of one of the answers. And how could we move using the standards in the recruiting process, bring excellence? So for us, having the standards in the international school space was about transparency between recruiters and candidates. That question that James just talked about, which is, what does it mean to have excellence in education? So having a set of standards that candidates could refer to and recruiters could refer to, saying, okay, we know what our goal is. And the candidate knew that I'm working towards this goal. And if I'm showing up in this way, recruiters are going to value that. And again, also for us, it was about a refocusing of the recruiting process back on the profession, student learning, away from kind of this list of, I taught here, I was in this school there, I got my education in this place, and a refocusing on what we really felt was important, like back about student learning. How is the performance in the classroom? And again, also a refocusing on a personal reflection, career-long planning, not just about, okay, I'm ready to get a job and I'm going to then just fill my resume and send it. Let's bring it back to elevating this whole concept of who am I, how am I showing up in the classroom, and make our recruiting about that, about how you are showing up in your profession. So I think in a very general way, I'm gonna answer that question in that way, in terms of how Ty wanted to show up and collaborate in this process as really a user of these, and helping to kind of move the needle in terms of, this is a philosophical idea of what standards can do, and then we're the kind of the practical side of, okay, how can this be implemented to actually do that work on a practical way. And I want to throw in another thing maybe for the next people moving forward, because one of the things that we've encountered during this process is something James touched on already, but what is the difference between standards, principles, values? And that is something I think it's a little mixed up in the mix. And so I'm going to kind of leave that one also out to the group.
Thanks, Brittany. Thanks for adding to the conversation. I just really want to thank Ty for the work that they've done with their resume builder that is focused on standards. I think it's a game changer, not only for individuals, but for schools. And with that, I want to introduce James DL, who is working in a school who uses standards. James, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Sue. Thanks for that. And thanks for the invitation to be part of this. My name is James DL. I'm currently the head of school at NIST International School in Bangkok in Thailand. In terms of why standards, I think one of the things, and I know it's cliche to say, but one of the things that we keep resonating and that we keep trying to reinforce is that we're professional teachers, we're not amateur teachers. And as professional teachers, we are therefore accountable to self-regulation, and we need to be regulated not only as individual teachers, but as schools too. So as a head of school, I have very few tasks, right? And the main one is to improve learning for kids and keep kids safe. And the biggest way, the highest leverage way, we know this from research, and a lot of this from James Strong's research, is around, teachers have the greatest positive impact on improving learning outcomes for kids. So the greatest way to leverage those is to help my professional colleagues, professional educators, improve their own practices. So in terms of having a common set of standards, that nomenclature really matters. And to be able to have a set of standards that are conceptual, and by conceptual, therefore, they're transferable, we also can honor not only the concepts that matter most within teaching, that we know from research, that we've probably built into our learning principles that we have within our schools, and to say these are the high leverage practices, these are the high leverage things that we need to be focused on, but also at the same time, be able to say, and this is what it might look like within the context of our school and within the context of the area that we're teaching within the school, within those age appropriate level with the students that we're dealing with. So I think that common nomenclature is absolutely critical. And again, to go back to the idea that schools do work in a rhythm where we tend to begin our school year at a certain point and we end our school year, and our lives are built around this rhythm of a school year. And one of the things that we try and reiterate and reinforce with our teaching colleagues is that if you're the same educator in August that you were in June, then we've really failed in terms of being a learning organization and helping you develop professionally. So we should be able to know more, do more, understand more in terms of delivering our professional craft and improving learning for kids. So again, having those common conceptual understandings, those conceptual framework, those standards of practice are really critical for us, because it gives us that shared language that we can talk about and transfer into an infinite number of ways. But now more than ever too, we're seeing the transferability of us globally as professionals. So to be able to have a common understanding, especially in a global milieu, if one of our standards might be something around, support learning in a culture of transition and mobility, but then to be able to unpack that in understanding within our own context, what does that look like, can really elevate the conversations that we're having, those supportive conversations in terms of how am I getting better as a professional within my craft. So for us, it's an absolutely critical framework for us to unpack, to understand what best practice looks like, and to help support the development of that one part of the school that, again, is the highest leverage piece to improving learning outcomes for kids. And that's why it's so important for us.
Thanks so much, James. I loved that you added that piece about standards being the starting point, and that really the unpacking of them with the context of the school is so important, instead of being handed a list of things that you're looking for with teachers. Love it. Thank you. Finally, on our panel, I'd like to introduce you to Bambi Betts.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bambi Betts, and currently working for many decades now with the Principals Training Center, and somewhat with TIE as well. First of all, just thank you to my colleagues here on this call. I'm very excited for the people that are listening in to have this level of guidance and opportunity to explore something that, as Brittany has said, has been going on for well over a decade. And huge nod and thanks to James Strong, who's actually the original research, was really the catalyst for all of us, I think, who moved this forward. So I don't think we would be having this conversation today, or the many to come, if it weren't, James, for your research. I know myself as an educator many decades ago, the book on the 18 qualities of effective teachers was transformational for me, and it wasn't standards at that time, So we talk so much in the international schools world, and I assume in the non-international schools world, about the value of research and how we want things to be research-based, etc. And one of the things I want to highlight here is, on the urgency question, is, when did you do this, James? When did you do this research? I mean, this is not something that just happened yesterday, and we need to get on the bandwagon and do it. Thanks to James Strong and other colleagues, we have the research. James DL is only able to say that this is the fundamental high leverage strategy for any school anywhere, because we have the research that tells us that the number one thing we can do is to ensure quality teaching. TIE has been dedicated to making sure there are quality teachers in every international school around the world since 1986. So just the urgency question is the kind of the main one that I wanted to address, is that teaching is a profession, maybe because we have fought to be a profession. And one of the things that's been missing in our profession is something that all other professions have. If you look at the writers and thinkers on what it makes a profession, the number one thing is you have a unique set of standards. And that word is used. That is a unique set of standards that have to do with that craft, with that profession. So when teachers want to be thought of as professionals, they need to have in the profession that set of things that define that professionalism. And along with professionalism come other things, which we will, I'm sure, get to talk to as we are today, as well as in the future podcasts. So the idea that was mentioned of uplifting the profession, that's been very much about the effort here, is to get the world to see that teaching is a profession. It isn't a 7:30 in the morning to 4 o'clock job. It's a profession, and all professions have standards. Another part of being a professional is the sense of agency. And we know that this is a conversation amongst teachers in the international schools world that is constantly there. What's above that level? Where do I have control and where don't I? How am I defined? Where's my identity coming from? So without the standards, as has been referred to, it's been basically longevity and preparation. And those are the two key things that we have put into the hands of recruiters to say, is this a good teacher or not? Well, that's rubbish. I'm sorry, that's rubbish. How do I know whether you're a good teacher just because you've been doing it for 10 years? How do I know that you're a good teacher just because you were prepared at a college or a university or a training program that claims to know what they're doing? James Strong has put on the table for us what that looks like when it's actually happening. So urgency, agency, and I think in the international schools world, and several of you referred to it, it's equity of access by our kids to quality teaching. The standards are one of the critical tools in ensuring that equity. They give us that starting point, because our goal, and I work primarily with the Principals Training Center, providing training programs for teachers, for teacher leaders, for all of the different educators in the international school context. The notion that every single kid in the charge of an international school gets equitable access to quality teaching is another organizer. I think that's driven us at TIE and the PTC to really raise people's consciousness about this and put some practical tools in place that are going to recognize the need for agency, recognize the need for equity of access by kids, and recognize the fact that we are, in the teaching world, a profession, and that we have all the tools now available to us to do that. We have to stop dithering, and actually start applying these tools and get out in front of it.
Thanks so much, Bambi. Thanks for reminding us all that teaching is a profession and that other professions have a set of standards. In my conversations with a lot of international school educators, I've heard them say, well, we don't have standards, but we have, a framework or a structure that we're using at our school. So they might have a teacher profile or a supervision criteria list or a list of dispositions that teachers need to have. So I'd love to hear from some members of the panel about what do you think about those things in comparison to having actual standards for teachers? Are these frameworks or structures enough in a school? Are they necessary? What's the difference, and what ultimately are the benefits for students? So I'd love to hear from anyone on the panel for this one.
I'll wade in on this, and I'll ask an initial question, which is that I would ask to a school that might make that claim. Are the frameworks that you're using research-based in terms of explicitly describing those practices that are going to have the biggest impact on improving learning for kids? What we call them is less important than do they focus our work around those high leverage practices. So that would be the first thing I would say. And I think that that's an important first place to start, because I know that one of the hesitations teachers have around using something called standards is this idea that it's like teaching to the test. And I'll often have teachers say, so you want me to work to the standard? And my response is absolutely yes. I want you to work to the standard, because the standard is what we're expecting and what we're holding ourselves accountable to. And it's interesting from a teacher point of view, this idea of being measured, this idea of being viewed is often, there's real hesitancy to that on the one side, which we understand that this is not only a profession for us, but also a passion and a calling. And it's us being, putting ourselves out there as educators, and having someone examine our craft can be scary. But I try to reinforce that by kind of flipping it around and saying, but if we don't look, and if we don't measure, and if we don't carefully, look at what people are doing, how do we find excellence? And how do we make sure that we can identify that excellence and then scale it across the school into other areas as well? So I think having a structure is absolutely critical. Having structures that are grounded in a framework and that is research-based is also critical. And then this does allow us to hold ourselves accountable to aiming toward, whether it's, are we approaching, are we meeting, are we exceeding? And again, what might that look like? And how do I know what to do to improve as a professional educator? So I'll leave it there and let others kind of wade in on that as well.
Any other thoughts?
Sue, may I add to
Please do, James.
To these comments? James, I really like the way you described our role as professional educators, and that we really have only two things that we do. Number one is safety. And unfortunately, in our world, that is so prime, it's so prominent. Until that occurs, nothing else occurs. But the second thing we do is teaching and learning. Children should be better at the end of the day for having spent time with us. At the end of the year, they should be better in some way. Otherwise, why were they there? That's all we do, is teaching and learning, helping kids get better and having a brighter future. With that in mind, how do we help those kids have the brighter future? And the way that I know to do it is to put the best leaders and the best teachers in a building. If we put world-class teachers in front of children, with children, for 13 straight years, we'll transform their world. We'll transform their lives. We'll have world-class schools. And that's where the role of standards come in. We can't have 20,000 different sets of standards. We'll be completely splintered, and it cannot be a sustainable and growth-oriented international school organization. A second point I'd like to build on from that Bambi, you started in your comments, and James, you alluded to it, and that is, so what makes a professional? What is a profession? And Bambi, what you said is that there's a specialized body of knowledge that's often epitomized in a set of standards. That's absolutely true. It's essential. And what are those standards? If we know what good research is, or if we know what good teaching is based on the best empirical evidence, why don't we practice it? But there's a second element to a profession. Any profession will also be able to and willing to monitor its own ranks. It must be able and willing to assess, how well am I doing? And I have seen from time to time a reluctance, especially in international schools, to embrace that willingness to assess. How good are our teachers? We make a huge assumption when we hire someone, we believe they're good. And something I ask audiences sometimes is, how many of you have ever hired a teacher? And if I'm with an administrative audience, of course, everybody's hands go up. Then I'll say, how many of you have ever made a mistake? And almost everybody's hand goes up. It's not just us that live with a mistake that we've made, it's the kids. And there's a moral imperative to getting this right, and standards help us get it right. That's why I think standards are important. They won't balance your checkbook, they won't save your school, but they will give you the guidance that you need to know what good teaching is. And then maybe, Sue, I'm going on a little bit longer than I intended. Just one more point I'm thinking about. Bambi, you also mentioned about, we assume we have good, you were talking about the school perspective, that we have good teachers. Well, let's hope we do, but it's a hope. How do we know we have good teachers? And there's a corollary to that point too. How can we help teachers be better? Even if they're good teachers, how can we help teachers be better? Because standards and their use are designed for continuous growth and improvement. And there's a simple reason for that. When teachers get better, when leaders get better, kids get better. And that, to me, is the epitome of what a standard is, or its intention is.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, I'd like to just hop in there just real quickly on all, this is such an exciting conversation to have. And the idea that what evidence do we use to determine, you raised, James Strong, like everybody is out in the international schools world, the number one thing that drives us is, are we getting good teachers in the school? I think that conversation is out there, right? What is the set of tools that we have available to do? One of the reasons that this podcast is even taking place is because of something that Brittany said in the introduction, that we have to, how are we going to move that needle? What are we going to do? How are we going to make it possible for the people who you stand in front of that audience and say, who's hired a teacher and have you ever made a mistake? How are we going to mitigate the number of people who raise their hand, at that point? And here again, it's about the evidence pieces. How does somebody who's hiring a teacher know from looking at the fact that they've spent 10 years doing it or prepared that they really are? So that's not enough evidence of the right type. Myself as a longtime recruiter, in international schools, it's just frustrating, right? That's all you got. So I just want to bring in this notion that this this career path and the resume builder, the things that Ty has put together now to sort of amplify this idea that what is evidence of those standards? And you don't get this when you have a framework of everybody's got their own framework, because then everybody will define their own evidence. So we can't talk about things. It's disingenuous to talk about creating global citizens, and being research-based and on, which every single school, go look at their missions. And, the title of the school is interchangeable because we all make commitments to these things. But then the evidence that we're using varies because it depends on, the person who's doing the hiring to decide. And then they don't even have any evidence to look at. So, I want to bring in the practical piece that, yeah, standards are really important. And we've known that thanks to James Strong and others in the research field. But how come they're not out there in every single school? We're talking international schools now in a big way. They're missing tools, the practical tools to operationalize. So I just want to give a shout out to the Thai work because we're saying, okay, teachers, show us the evidence. And by the way, when someone writes a recommendation letter for you, we're telling you, write it around the standards. Don't just write some random letter that says, I think this was a good teacher and here's what I think. Imagine how the world of the international schools world would be different if every single letter of recommendation that was written on which was a piece of the evidence that a school had or a principal was going to hire was around the same standards. Think about how that uplifts and elevates the entire profession and gives way more equity to kids around the world.
One of the smartest things that James can do when he onboards a new teacher in Bangkok is to be able to say to that teacher, here's what we are looking for. Here's how we define effective teaching. And as you said, James, do I want you to meet those standards? Do I want you to achieve those standards? Yes, I do. We know what good teaching is, and that's what I'm going to be looking for. If you can give a teacher a set of guidance, teachers are motivated or they wouldn't be in this profession. They certainly didn't come for the money. They didn't come for the prestige. They came because they're devoted to it, and they stayed because they're devoted to it. If you can say to that teacher, here are the tools you need to use to grow your own self and to be the better self that you can be. That's the use of standards. That's the smart thing to do. And ultimately, Sue, I think where we play this out is what do we do with standards? It's not should we have standards, why have standards? I mean, that just seems like a given to me, and that's been most of our conversation. The really critical issue is where the rubber meets the road. What do you do with the standards? And I like the notion of saying, yes, I want you to fulfill those standards because that's what we know that the research tells us makes a good teacher good.
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks to all of you. I do have to go back to the point that James Strong that you just said. What if James DL did not have to say, here are the standards at our school, because they were the standards at all of the international schools? Just think about the difference in the conversation of that would be a starting point for new teachers. Thank you. Britt, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to pipe in on that too. I think that I touched on it at the beginning, and I think James and Bambi both talked about it too, this whole concept of knowing for both the teacher or the educator and the person recruiting them to always have this list there is extremely empowering for the person who is trying to better themselves. It also answers the question is, how do I know I'm ready, to take this job? How do I know before I've even put myself out there? How do I know I'm ready? How do I show that I'm ready? Do thy colleagues think that I'm ready too? And I think those are the questions we asked ourselves at TIE, creating this system around the standards, is to have all those questions answered. If I am a teacher ready to be a teacher leader, here is the standards that I'm holding myself to. Here are the standards that I would like to show that I'm ready for. Here is my colleagues saying, yes, this person is also ready. And here's the evidence that I have built to show you that. Now, as somebody, looking to hire excellent teacher, you're armed with this already. The teachers are armed with it. You are armed with it. You can go into an interview. Just think about the types of questions that you can ask in that interview with all of this in front of you. That to me is what raising the bar, so that that the whole system, the bar is raised. And so I just want to kind of to add that, and that practical scope is that, you're empowering all the different players, and helping to alleviate those transition points. And we have experienced this. People have come to us and said, I thought I was ready for a headship. And then I was like trying to answer the standards piece. And I realized there were some pieces that I still needed to work on. So they did themselves a favor. They saved time on the other end of the recruiting, and they went back and reflected and thought, okay, I need to do work on this for the next year or two, and then I'm going to come ready. And so I think that's another piece that the standards helps with. It's that here I am. And, those transitions, as we know, have been very difficult in the international school world to do effectively. We know we need a lot more people. We know that it's a growing space. How do we move people who traditionally have not been able to move through the pipeline up through the pipeline? These are some tools that are really effective, so I just wanted to add that too.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm just going to pause for a second. I think that you've set us up with what the panel has just shared with us, set us up for all the coming episodes, because the coming episodes are about what do you do once you have standards, and talking to schools around the world about how they are using them, whether it's for growth and supervision, whether it's for onboarding, whether it is for the hiring and recruiting practices, whether it's professional development. We've heard some amazing stories that you're going to hear more about. But I would like to do one final lightning round. And in that lightning round, I'd just love to hear, just in one sentence, one piece of advice that you would give international schools to move towards a more standards-based approach, whether it's the starting with the standards or what to do with them. What would be the one piece of advice that you would like to give to schools? And I won't call names. I'll just let people, when they're ready, give us your advice.
I'll be happy to start, and then I'm finished.
Thanks, James.
ISKL, International School of Kuala Lumpur, uses standards. I've worked with them extensively. It's been a few years, and they took an additional step of building the standards into their board mission statement, into their school mission of what it is that we believe in and what we want to practice. When that happens, then everything that you do permeates from what your belief system is, what it is that we're looking for. One of the problems that I think occurs unintentionally, I know it's unintentional, in so many quality international schools is that they overwhelm themselves with initiatives, frameworks, this and that. I was in a very high quality school not too long ago. They had a consultant this weekend, and they're going to have another one in a couple of weekends, and they have this curriculum they're working on. And you put all of that together, and I don't see how in the world you make any sense of it. There are a dozen different initiatives going on, and I don't see the rhyme and reason to it. If you have standards, then you can use those standards to ask yourself the question every time, does this move the mark forward for us? Does it fit within our essential belief system of what good teaching and good leading really is? And if it's not essential, why are we doing it? You frame everything and you align everything based on your essential beliefs, which are operationalized in a set of guiding standards. We need that guiding light.
Great. Thanks, James. And we actually have two of our senior leaders from ISKL who will be joining us on one of the podcasts. So thank you for that. Great. Anyone else? It's a lightning round. One piece of advice that you would give.
I would say be brave enough to be precise and say, these are the standards that we know have the biggest impact on improving learning. This is what we're going to stay focused on. So let's get started. And it doesn't need to be any more than that. And I think once you move beyond, you have to find the why, you have to have the why, but more importantly, then you need to start doing the work.
Good.
And just stay focused on, this is what we're going to be doing. So let's get on it, like with it together.
Great. Thanks, James.
I would add, Sue, that really kind of an amplification of what both Jameses have said, that it's a foundational document. And when you start thinking of it as just like your mission, or even at the governance level, we in the PTC, we do a lot of governance work now. We have a governance training center for international schools, and we try to teach at the governance level that the number one important thing is quality teaching in a school, and that's where all your resources should be allocated, the lion's share of your resources, etc., and that you need to have the fundamentals, have-tos, built in at the policy level. So I would, add a policy at the governance level is a great place to establish those standards. Even beyond the mission, there's a missing link between the mission and the operation, and that typically is policy. It's the policy that can only be modified or amplified by the governance and whatever the ownership is of the school. So, take it to that top level, which is really just an amplification of what both Jameses have said, that, it needs to become the centerpiece, so that it's required that you hire with it. It's required that you build your professional learning programs around it. And it's required that teachers become adept at identifying the evidence that lets them show that they are reaching these standards, primarily because if they're not, our kids are going to not have that equity of access to the best teaching.
Yeah, I think it's hard, but I think I would just I think James said, be brave enough to be precise. And I think building on what Bambi just said, also just be brave enough to hire. I mean, because that's what I do. Be brave enough to hire using that lens, because the freedom that will bring and the empowerment that will bring, I think is really important.
Thank you to each of you for contributing your wisdom, your experience, and your thoughts to help us all move forward. And thank you to our listeners. For schools that are looking for a set of standards to get started, please check out theptc.org. For individuals looking for a way to incorporate evidence of teacher standards into their resume for international schools, check out tieonline.com. And join us next time when we talk with international teachers and leaders about current practices in their schools and what evidence might look like, sound like, and feel like for international teacher standards. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the TIE podcast. We will be back again with more to keep you informed and to keep you connected with international educators from around the world. Do check out our website for more news and research articles on international education. Also, write to me at editor@tieonline.com if you would like to share an article. Article submission details can also be found on our website www.tieonline.com. Once again, thank you and hope you learned something new today. Stay kind and stay connected. See you soon.